Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for welcoming us to the plenary today. We're so happy to be here. I'm Elizabeth Weiss. I write the Mandarin Immersion Parents Council blog, and I wrote A Parent's Guide to Mandarin Immersion back in 2014. If anyone wants to update it, call me. It needs an update, and I don't have time to do it. The way we're going to do it today is I'll give a very brief introduction to our four parents, and then I'm going to let each of them speak for about 10 minutes to answer the question of why did you choose Mandarin Immersion, what helped you and your family on that journey, and what's the advice you would give to parents coming into the system, and then that will give us time at the end to answer some audience questions. One thing I want to start with is I think many of the people who are watching this are teachers, and I know all the moms on this panel, we want to thank the teachers because you guys are the reason our kids speak Chinese, and teachers do so much work that isn't always appreciated and sometimes don't get all the support they need, but we are so grateful because we give our children to you and you give them back better, smarter, stronger, more able. It is an enormous task and we are so very, very grateful. So let me start with, so we have four parents on our panel today. Patty Huang, who is a parent in San Francisco. Her kids started out in the public Mandarin Immersion School program in San Francisco and have since in middle school moved to one of our private options. Our kids actually went to the same grade school and my kids tutored her kids later on because they were tutors in high school. Then we have Jennifer Polino, who is a student at the Union County School District in North Carolina. They've actually got a very strong and well-articulated program there, or pretty good articulation. Samantha Sather, who is a parent at Yinghua Academy in Minneapolis, and we all know Minnesota has got a fantastic network of Mandarin immersion programs, and theirs was the first, I'm pretty sure it was the first charter immersion school in the United States. And finally, Love Zubiler, who is a parent at Barnard Mandarin Magnet Elementary in San Diego, which is a all Mandarin immersion magnet school that pulls from the entire area of San Diego. So it's an interesting program. So I'm going to first start with, we're just going to do alphabetical order. Patty Wong, each parent will speak for a little under 10 minutes, and then that'll give us time at the end to take questions. So Patty, I'll let you start.
Thanks, Beth. Can everyone hear me? Good. Okay. Why did I choose Mandarin immersion for my child? I think a lot of the reasons will sound pretty familiar. The potential for more opportunities and connections, both professionally and personally, enhanced problem solving, all that. But why Chinese specifically? Well, I grew up in the suburbs of New York in a Taiwanese-speaking household and went to Saturday school for 6 or 7 years. So I'm familiar with the limitations. It's funny now when I look back at some of my homework and tests, even if I did well on the tests, I can't read some of them. So I understand firsthand the limitations and hurdles of that learning just once a week. And I also never thought that learning another language or speaking another language when I was growing up was cool until we moved to Tokyo when I was a teenager and I went to an international school. And there the kids flip back and forth between Japanese. We'd moved for my father's work, so I went to an international school and there were a lot of kids there who flip back and forth between English and Japanese pretty effortlessly. And that's when I really realized English alone wasn't enough, and that it was a lot more fun to share a lot of words and concepts, cultural concepts and idioms with multilingual friends. So when I heard about San Francisco Unified's immersion program at Star King, I was pretty sold right away. But I did, all the recon. Your book and your blog and everything that you started was invaluable, and I tapped into that community pretty quickly. And also my mother. So my parents are from Taiwan, and my mother had said when my daughter was in preschool, the summers are so hot. Now in preschool is probably the only time outside of the summer months that we can take her if you want. So she actually took my daughter, enrolled her for a month in nursery school in Taiwan, and she was 4 years old, and it just worked like a charm. She literally came back from Taiwan speaking Chinese in her sleep. And I remember one day she said, how do you say Cao Mei in Chinese? And I thought, oh, this is great. She just identifies the strawberry as Cao Mei. So and I was never worried about the English. I've always heard parents, express some concerns about, well, is this going to slow them down in English? And just, having grown up the way I did, I knew that was going to be an issue. And also, part of the reason we have a lottery system here in San Francisco to get in, and in Stark King, our elementary school was getting pretty popular at the time. There were certain seats reserved for those that could test in, and so I did, some investigations into what that test was like, and basically they take the kids into a back room and ask them a few questions and expect them to not just answer questions, but to kind of initiate conversation. And so that was part of the reason why we weren't in a immersion preschool. So I said, okay, go, do the real deal immersion, and it worked out well. And she got into the program, and for me, it was so. There's partly the heritage aspect to why I chose Chinese over other languages. Let's see. Did you want me to talk about the why over other languages?
Yeah. Go through the list of questions we'd shared. I think each of us will go through that, because I think that'll give a kind of a sense of different schools have different arcs, different families have different arcs, but I think altogether it'll make a very strong sense of why the parents are signing our kids up for this.
So, so here in San Francisco, we're fortunate that we have a lot of different language immersion choices. There's a beautiful Italian immersion school. They're in an Emilio Reggio program, and physically the building and the campuses are really impressive. I remember them even pointing out the way the silhouette of a tree's shadow, was cast on a wall in their building, and it was just, when your kid is 4 and you start thinking, okay, well, where would I like to vacation and have a free little translator? That was very appealing. And because I had lived in Japan too, and to be honest, I really like the way Japanese sounds over Mandarin and over Cantonese. So I thought about that too. And then Spanish is just so easily reinforced. You get on any bus or, walk down the Mission here in San Francisco, and you hear Spanish pretty easily. So I went through all those, but I kept coming back to Chinese as the language that made sense. And also because it was the hardest. And I thought, well, I love learning languages myself. It's a lifelong process. And so let's start with the hardest one. I can support it. And selfishly, I'd studied Japanese more recently than Chinese. And I thought, well, this would be good to refresh my Mandarin. And it really has. I think she outpaced me in like 3rd grade, though. Definitely in the reading, even though I think that is still a tough part of the immersion, the pleasure reading. So early on, when we were all supposed to decide what kind of education system we wanted for our kid, that was the time when I was like, well, what is Montessori and what is, and like I said, we have a lot of choices here, but I always knew that the language immersion was was key. And I had skimmed through Amy Chua's Tiger Mom book and decided I wasn't a Tiger Mom by her definition, because I knew that I wanted it to be fun. In my own experience on Saturdays, I liked it. I liked it well enough. I have a sister who's 4 years older, and so she kind of roped me into convincing my parents after a few years that we didn't need it. We spoke Taiwanese at home, so Mandarin to us was this weird like punishment, And I joke that when people, even my mom, was wondering why are you. I think the way she put it was like so crazy about the immersion, and it wasn't that it was crazy, but it was available, it was free, it was working, and but I joked around that it was a pattern of abuse. But
we're getting towards the end of your time. I just want to make sure that you get to the one question of if there was one piece of advice you could give to the teachers and administrators in the room, what would it be that you wish somebody had told you at the very beginning from the schools you were looking at?
Oh, at the schools I was looking at. Yeah. So we're at a progressive project-based middle school now, and it's great the way they do things. Part of the reason why we left the public school district was because effectively here in San Francisco, it ends after fifth grade. And I guess not so much advice, but I guess I wish I had known that the teacher retention issue would be so difficult, and the commitment of the district would be, wasn't that solid. When I first started out, there was a great movement to get, to build out each grade level here in San Francisco, and it's great until third grade. Everything's pretty solid. Fourth grade, there always seems to be some teacher issues. It's an expensive area, so keeping teachers here who are bilingual and so well credentialed and are willing to work for a public school salary, I guess, is tough. So we shifted to Presidio Knoll School, which does a great job of checking all the boxes and making it fun. Interestingly, that they're more focused on just having a great project-based, inquiry-based program that's solid and almost just has Chinese as a byproduct. And one thing that I kind of was surprised to learn during COVID when I got to overhear some classes was that there was a lot of kind of Chinglish mixed in at the middle school level, which I wasn't expecting at all. And my daughter wasn't either, because it'd been pretty purely in Mandarin class Mandarin, and people didn't mix in English words. But I learned that there's this thing called translanguaging, which I'd never heard of before. And to be honest, I'm not that familiar with all the research, so I am still a little skeptical that, it could breed laziness. But like I said before, I think, this is a lifelong process, and it's just a win that my daughter has not asked to quit Mandarin immersion by seventh grade. She's in seventh grade now. So I'm not sure what's next. I think, there's always talk of like, well, what's your end goal? And I don't really know, except for if there's a one metric, maybe it's the AP test, but just loving learning the language and wanting to continue. And, like I said, when I go back and look at my homework and I can't read it, it's very sad. And so just to always strive for that.
Excellent. Thank you. That's very helpful. And yes, articulation and getting past middle school into high school is an interesting question. Jennifer, I'll let you go next. And unmute yourself.
All right, there we go. I actually must have thought someone was going to do that for me. So my first order of business was to echo the thanks to teachers. So to my daughter, who has been through the Mandarin Immersion program, Taylor Polino, I'd like to thank all of her teachers and her current teacher, Hugh Mueller, in high school. So my daughter joined the program in kindergarten at Marvin Elementary in the Pioneer class. So the first year it was offered in our area, in our public school district, and then through middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and currently is in 9th grade, so in her first year of high school. I would like to thank the panel as well. It's been great to kind of get to know folks through email and working together. I think the parent support through Mandarin is super important. And I'd like to thank Donna Podgorny from our district, who's the one who recommended that I might be a good speaker here. So in terms of selecting Mandarin, some of my comments are going to be very similar to Patty's. Some are very different because I don't have any of the heritage experience. So choosing the program, it was the first time that we had the opportunity for Mandarin immersion in the public school, and we were the pioneer class. So there were some lottery type meetings of getting together and learning about it. And we were just absolutely fascinated. Lifelong learner of languages, not necessarily very good at it, but I studied French in school and went to France with my French teacher when I was 16, and it was the trip of a lifetime. My grandparents were kind enough to, give that to me as a gift, and just really instilled passion and love of languages and learning. My oldest is also a French learner and has had a chance to study abroad. She's in college. And my middle is now learning Spanish. So we're learning 3 different languages across the family, which is super helpful. But the program, quite frankly, was not available when our oldest 2 went through it. So we might have considered it, but it wasn't an option. So when we learned about the program, the fact that it was provided in public school, we just thought was fantastic. We thought it was an opportunity that we just couldn't pass up. We liked it for learning the language. We liked the idea of the gosh, see, this is why I'm not so good at language.
Differentiation, it's a hard one.
Thank you. That would provide for our student the application in the real world, whether she wanted to, actually go and study or work in China or just use it in a global business perspective was interesting to us. And really, as we began to study it, learning a little bit just about the creative learning and the cognitive development, almost some of the problem solving, almost like doing puzzles, some of the ways that kids would approach things was super appealing to us. So regardless of whether she really applied the language, what it would do for her as a learner was super appealing to us. I have to say, for me, working in a global business environment, I worked in aerospace for 20 plus years and had the good fortune to travel to Hong Kong, to China, seeing folks that were able to translate the language, many people that could translate from Chinese into English, not nearly as many that could translate in the reverse, and English speaking native person into Chinese. So just a very few that we were associated with who could, and what a great capability they had, the understanding of culture, the learning, just really impressed with that. So we thought it would be a great opportunity. For us, we actually asked our kindergartner. She was obviously quite young to really, make a sound decision at that stage. But my husband, myself, and then the 2 older siblings all thought it was a great idea. So we all kind of talked about it as a family and elected to go for it. One of the questions was, what resources support was useful to you and your child throughout the language journey? So for us, we did not have family, grandparents, support, help. So one of the biggest fears my husband and I had when we first started is, how are we going to help our child with homework? We don't understand this. So while we could look at math homework and still understand, obviously, the numbers and assisting with that, we couldn't read any of the instruction. So for us, communication from the teacher was absolutely critical. Just understanding what they were doing, communication to us in English so that we could understand, and then providing us some examples. I think one of the most powerful things that our school did, and this was with some of the district support and help they had, is early in the kindergarten journey, we came in, and I think they didn't allow the parents to come into the classroom maybe August, September, the first couple of months, because they didn't want the kids to revert to English. But they had us come in maybe December timeframe for a holiday, and I honestly don't remember if it was a Christmas or a Chinese New Year celebration, but sometime over the holidays for a celebration. And the kids did everything in Chinese. You know, the teachers addressed them, the kids responded. We couldn't understand necessarily what they were saying, but we could tell that the comprehension was there, that the support, the connection, you know, that type of thing. So it was very powerful. So communication was key for us. For me, I did not find Elizabeth's handbook before beginning the program, but we founded a Mandan Immersion Parent Liaison Committee because there were some parents that were really struggling. We had some issues with kids not liking the program, with some behavior management in the classroom, you know, all kinds of issues. So we formed this committee really to help the teachers in the district, and I was asked to help with that, but to support communication. And we found, Beth, your handbook, it actually enabled us to reach out to other schools that had been through multiple years of the program. So for us, where it was our first year, we reached out to and connected with other parents who had been through this for multiple years, and that was super helpful to us. I think learning and talking to the teachers, to other parents. I mean, as the kids were young, we would take pictures of homework and ask other parents for help. And we had a couple of kids in the program whose parents speak Mandarin. And so they occasionally would, you know, say, no, you're misunderstanding. You know, this is what this says. So the involvement we had in homework was really more in connecting our child with other resources and or with the internet and that type of thing, kind of getting tips and tools, you know, through others as well. We didn't have as great of access to tutors. What we found at that stage is that the high school kids who had been through the Mandarin program were not as advanced as our children. So we really could not use those tutors. We looked into that. But what we ended up doing is some of our teachers agreed to tutor, but they would tutor kids not in their own classroom. So kids that were of a different grade level. So the teachers really became our resource to help with that. I would say the reading that Patty talked about, I did worry about a little bit when I looked at and compared my daughter's reading and some of her spelling and things like that at second grade to, you know, where my other kids were. That kind of freaked me out a little bit. But my husband was very calm, and he said, hey, they told us this would happen, you know, be okay with this, you know, just take it through. And absolutely by third grade, boom, we were caught up and fine. But that was when we elected to get a little bit of tutoring support, more for comprehension and kind of the pleasure reading that Patty was talking about. We didn't feel like we could ask or probe our child on things. So that was the tutoring we did wasn't as much for schoolwork or classwork as it was to try to deepen comprehension. That's what we focused on.
And for the last question, just because we're near
Yes.
the end of the time, just what would you wish that someone had told you, either starting grade school or middle school or high school?
Yeah, a couple things. To approach this as fun, recognize that with your kids being the pioneer class, there's going to be a ton of assessment. And as much as you worry that that takes time from their learning, don't worry about it. It's more for the program to, you know, continue to advance. And what I wish that we heard more about, and again, we were the pioneer program, so it was hard for them, but what is the plan for middle school and for high school? As an example, when my daughter started sixth and seventh grade, they learned their science and social studies in Mandarin. And then in eighth grade, they had a language class. That was something that after 2 years, the district learned and recognized that that was difficult, and they switched to language overall. And so I think just sharing what that plan is early, and that's actually something that even as I asked my ninth grade daughter, she wishes that she heard more about it in sixth grade, you know, what the plan was for middle school, what the plan was for high school, even in fifth grade, what's the plan for middle school. So just so that you kind of know what those options are going to be. We're really happy that it's continued, but it's now, you know, 10% as opposed to 80 or 90% immersion. So it's a very, very different process. But our daughter will likely graduate with, AP and IB credentials, dual language credential on diploma. So just fantastic.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you.
And Samantha.
All right. Hello, everyone. I will dive into the questions. The first question being, why did you choose Mandarin Immersion for your children? First of all, I chose Inghua Academy for many reasons. I am a Midwesterner. I was born and raised in Wisconsin. My mother is an immigrant from Jakarta, Indonesia, and my father is American. So I grew up in a very international, interracial, interfaith family. My mother's Muslim and my father's Jewish. So I had that experience growing up, and in Wisconsin of all places, I grew up in a small city that was very predominantly Caucasian and Christian. So I've kind of always had that outsider perspective and always felt like different. And in the 80s and 90s, there was this term called melting pot. America's motto at the time was melting pot. So my mother being an immigrant, her father's from China, my grandmother's from Indonesia, but my mom was born in Jakarta. She felt at that time that teaching us her language would give us an accent, which, now we think is so silly. It's so beautiful that you speak many languages and celebrate, your uniqueness. Well, back then it was melting pot. You had to fit in, and, it was a different time. So she made the choice to not teach us her language, and later regretted it as the world changed. And as things became a lot more apparent in general society, that it was a unique thing to be different and to have all these beautiful ancestries and to share your story and all of that. So that's the initial reason, was an ancestral choice, that I really wanted to tap into my own roots and ancestry. And I really wanted to instill my children with a sense of pride, because growing up in a city where you're just seen as different and you get teased for being different, I just really wanted my children to have a strong sense of pride of where they came from and the ancestors that came before them. So the second reason, Mandarin Chinese is the most widely spoken language in the world. I mean, I wanted to give my kids an opportunity I wanted to open the world for them, not just the country, but just the world, that they could have an opportunity to communicate, make friendships, and get to know people from halfway around the planet. We do have family. Most of my Indonesian family is still in Indonesia, but we do have a lot of Chinese family members, and people speak Chinese in our family. So I wanted to give them an opportunity that they could live, work, and study abroad if they wanted to. So that was the second reason. The third reason is the most obvious. It's an incredible school. I'm an educator myself. I teach at a community college in Minneapolis. So I did a ton of research and was super impressed with not only are the test scores obviously very strong and high, but I was always curious about the extracurricular. I feel like that is more of an indication of a strong school, a thriving school, is not just we produce high test scores. It's also, do you have a thriving arts program? Our school happens to have a really awesome, innovative physical education program, music and things like that. So that actually more attracted me, was like the extra stuff in addition to the stellar academics. We got in a lottery system. It's a lottery system to get in. We live in Northeast Minneapolis, and we just loved the opportunity to have a choice. And Inghua happens to be only 2 miles away from my home, so it does feel like a neighborhood school. But we have students, we have friends, and my kids' friends are in so many different area codes. And some families say, well, aren't you afraid that they're not going to catch up in English, or they're not going to have neighborhood friends? And for us, it was more exciting. I'm like, they get to go to different parts of the metro. They get to go across town and get to know other people. And so for us, it was more exciting to kind of leave and explore other areas and get to know other families from different parts of the city. So we saw that as an asset. Around the time we got in, a New York Times article came out about the school, and we got really lucky. We were waitlisted, and I will never forget our executive director and academic director said, have faith, you may get in. So we were lucky that we got in. We were, my son, my oldest, is a part of a class. He was a part of a class of 5 kindergartens full. So we were very lucky to get in. He was a part of that 5th class. So, and the rest is history. Sibling preference. My daughter got in. So yeah. And to this day, it's still, there's a chance because it's a lottery, but it is a highly sought after school. The second question, what informed and influenced my decision? I kind of covered, I did a lot of research, and what really kind of sealed the deal for me personally, I do believe, and as an educator, I think it truly sets a tone from the top down. So I was seeing the things that people don't tell you to look for. You're like, do people get along? Does there seem to be a positive atmosphere? Do people seem in general excited to be at work? So I was kind of like looking when I went on tours, I was looking at all of those other things. And what really impressed me were the administrators being so approachable and friendly and sincere and warm and responsive, and everyone from the way people interacted with each other, there just seemed to be this synergy, that this was a very healthy, thriving community in school. So that kind of sealed the deal for me, and not to mention the stellar faculty there and staff. What resources and support was useful for me and our child throughout the language journey is the third question. I always felt very comfortable. Like I said, I feel very much comfortable to approach the administrators if I have questions or concerns, the faculty and the staff. So what really kind of helped us was also the parent community. We have a very large and supportive parent community. And I do believe that when families choose immersion, and specifically in the Twin Cities, for instance, we're in the Midwest, so we don't have, necessarily the diversity of some areas on the coast, but it's a very intentional and personal choice. So people don't just like fall into immersion. You like deeply research, and it's a commitment. So for me, I think what really helped was, and I know there was a question in the chat about how do you get parents on board with this? I think Inghua did a really good job at being very explicit and clear and upfront that it is a commitment to the family. Like, you also need to, it's not just us and they're going to magically speak Chinese, but you need to also put time in as a family to help and read to your children and support the teachers. And, thank you, educators and everyone, you're amazing. And I think that was the most important part, was like that really clear onboarding process and having an interactive sort of kindergarten event where my kids got to actually experience what it was like and the parents got to watch. I think that also helped to kind of bring it to life. Like, okay, this is the real deal. Like, your kids and will be speaking Mandarin, and we won't be able to help with that homework. And they actually tell you, even if you're a family speaking Chinese, don't teach them Chinese because it could be different, and all of those things. So I just think those resources helped immensely, and communicating with the teachers whenever we had questions. So my kids use iChinese Reader, Pleco, and Chairman's Bow in school as support as well. And last but not least, the last question, if there was one piece of advice, what would it be? Personally, I think the strongest piece of advice that I tell other families as a parent in Chinese immersion is I couldn't stress enough the importance of your commitment to the school. Ask how your teachers are doing, show interest, be that bridge between the school and the home. Make a space where your kids can study, really put it as a priority, because it truly is an investment of time, energy, and passion. And you really need to be all in with it for your children to be successful. They can only do so much. So I think the more they see you positively interacting with the school and showing interest and volunteering your time, they're going to just see that connection and be overall more successful. So, and then the best piece of advice from the administrators, I would say, trust the process. And I can say now, with my son being in 7th grade and they do catch up in their English. They'll be fine. They're surrounded by English. But I in the beginning, you're just kind of scared. And I do remember being in that place of like, oh my gosh, it's so different. It's so radical than like what I had growing up in like general society. But I just really love that I'm giving the gift of a skill and a language that they have opportunity. It's truly, we're giving our children opportunities to live and see the world. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Love.
Good morning, everybody. I'm so happy to be here among all these amazing panelists and hearing many similarities between our programs and also many new ideas and experiences. So I'm very happy to share my experiences with you now. In 2013, we enrolled our son in Mandarin Immersion kindergarten because we wanted something extra, something we could never give him on our own. So living in San Diego, we knew our son, or both of our kids, could pick up Spanish pretty easily. And my husband and I are both musicians. We could give him music lessons. If we wanted more science, we could give him more science. So Chinese is one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult language in the world. And it's not something you can just pick up or learn on the side. And we felt that immersion was the only way. And we also knew, as the other panelists here knew, that Mandarin would undoubtedly play an important role in our world economy and our geopolitical future. So that would give any fluent speaker an edge. And that's how our journey at Barnard Mandarin Magnet Elementary School began. And like many others here, we at first had our doubts. Would the language be too much for him? Would it be too hard? Is it relevant? Who will he speak Chinese to? No one in our family speaks a word of Mandarin, and we have no Asian heritage. But we were reassured quickly when he came home his first week of school, singing songs in Mandarin, showing us the meaning behind different characters, and wowing our adult friends at dinner parties with his exotic-sounding Chinese phrases. And we slowly started to realize, on top of that, that our school was giving him a lot more than just language. They were giving him an entire culture. And this made the language acquisition possible and fun. So on top of learning to read, speak, and write in Mandarin in kindergarten, our son was practicing lion dancing for the Chinese New Year celebrations, doing calligraphy and Chinese paintings at school. He learned about the history of China, its dynasties, its wars, trades, the Silk Road, and so much more. And he taught us about the Moon Festival and the Chinese Zodiac. And that happened all over many years. It wasn't obviously all in kindergarten. And it was funny because the culture began infiltrating our lives in very unexpected ways. I remember one time we were cleaning out our kitchen cabinets, and my son held up a can of expired peas and yelled in mortal disgust, "Oh my gosh, Mommy, these peas expired in the year of the horse." And it was so much fun to have that be part of our lives. And his teacher, Mao Lao Shi, told us one day, don't ever move him to a regular school. He's going to be bored. And I think she was right. So since those days, more than 9 years ago, my son and I have been to China 3 times, including once with our entire family and once with 15 other families from his graduating 5th grade class. And on that trip in particular, it was cathartic to see all the kids interacting with locals in the local language and seeing the culture that they so diligently cultivated over the years. Both of my children have participated in the Chinese Bridge language competition. Our family has become regulars in San Diego's Chinese and Asian scenes. We celebrate the Moon Festival, the Spring Festival, and participate in the dragon boat races with our friends. And most recently, we've stood up with our friends, teachers, and peers to Asian hate. Because the San Diego Unified School District has created a K-12 Mandarin immersion program, my son is now in 8th grade at Pacific Beach Middle School, where the program continues. And next year, he'll be a freshman at Mission Bay High School, where, again, the immersion program continues. And my daughter, who's currently in 5th grade, is following in his footsteps. And one thing that Beth wanted me to mention today about our program that I find really interesting is that the largest demographic is Hispanic families. And that's naturally a high demographic for our area here in San Diego. But it's nice to see that number reflected in our school's diversity. Beyond that, we have families who speak only Russian, Arabic, French, and even Dutch in their homes. For some kids in our program, Chinese is but one of 3, 4, or 5 languages spoken in their homes. I recently asked some of these families why they enrolled their kids in the Mandarin Immersion program when their kids are already proficient in a 2nd or 3rd or more language. And overwhelmingly, the answer is the same as mine, so they can be competitive in the changing world around them. So despite these amazing accomplishments and support from our amazing teachers, principals, our district, external organizations like the Chinese Cultural Center at San Diego State University and Hanban, or the former Confucius Institute, the journey has not been without its challenges. We continually fight for more funding for our school and raise more money through our PTA. As a public school, we get no extra funding from our district to implement the special needs of our program. We struggle to find the right curriculum or the right combination of existing curricula to match the needs of our K-12 program. It's difficult to find Mandarin teachers for our school and to keep them. The K-12 language programs are not common in Mandarin in the USA. Spanish, German, or French maybe, but not Mandarin. So there's little precedence, no perfect curriculum, and not enough success stories yet. And the academics have become more challenging for my kids. So over the years, I've seen many families leave our program. Our elementary school starts with 4 kindergarten classes, which is 100 kids. And this year, our 12th grade class, which is the, as someone else referred to it, the pioneering K-12 class, the very first class to graduate that started in kindergarten, has about 20 students in it. For some families, the goal was merely to expand the neuroplasticity of the brain, and I guess elementary school is enough for them to achieve that. For other families, the commute from their homes throughout the county to our school is too much or too hard. And still for others, the commitment of learning this difficult language and the extra homework and effort requires is too much. For others, when a student struggles in English language arts or math, it is the Mandarin that is inadvertently blamed. And I find this to be the most interesting reason for people leaving. I've heard so many times sentiments such as, my son is struggling in math and we just can't handle the Mandarin, so we're going to leave. Or, my daughter's reading level is too low in English and the Mandarin is a distraction, so we're going to leave. What has helped our family remain committed to our program? I have a list of things. So the first is culture. A school that embraces more than just the language. A school like Barnard that pre-COVID also embraced the culture and the arts on a daily basis. This makes learning relevant and so much fun for the kids. 2, strong English language arts programs. To be successful in Mandarin, the parents need to be reassured that their kids will also be competent in English language arts, math, and science. And unfortunately, for better or worse, we want it all. 3, strong communication between our principals and our parents. A good partnership with the PTA, and transparency is key. 4, a community that welcomes families and supports them throughout the journey. Our PTA created a mentor program that helps incoming families understand how our school works and gives them a clear idea of what to expect even before they set foot in the kindergarten classroom. 5, parent support. And this, I think, was the most helpful for me personally. I took a parents' Mandarin class offered through the school that gave me a glimpse of the language. It was once a week in the library for several months, and I think I took it my son's third grade year. I learned about stroke order, counting, tones, pronunciation, pinyin, telling dates and times, and a few other fun phrases. And this helped me quiz my kids on their vocabulary words in elementary school. And even though they still laugh at my pronunciation, it allows me to comprehend how the language works. That was so useful to me. 6, our kids need relevancy. And while a 5th grade China trip is not feasible for everybody, seeing my son speak with Chinese locals in Mandarin with his friends was cathartic for all of us. It gave us a deeper understanding of and an appreciation for what they were learning on a daily basis. And it made these kids hungry for more. They were ready to go into 6th grade in the middle school and keep working. And finally, goals. Our K-12 program needs to have metrics, a 5-year plan, and transparency of how our students can achieve success. What is success? passing the AP test? I don't know. All of this needs to be defined so our parents and students know what they are committed to and what they are aiming for. That is something that our program still struggles with. And if you wanted to know what piece of advice would have helped me on day one, I guess I would say being flexible and creative and not stopping fighting and pushing, because it's going to be a bumpy road. We're still trying to figure things out. And our principals can be very creative and resourceful and reactive. And I have found that that communication, that flexibility and creativity, and that constant push is all worth it in the end. Ultimately, I feel so lucky to be part of this community, and I appreciate all that you, our wonderful educators, are doing to teach and to inspire our kids. So I welcome your questions and ideas today and going forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much, love. And I will just add in, as a parent, so both my daughters are now in college. One of them's at Wellesley doing international relations. The other is at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And surprisingly, just declared a Chinese major. She has yet to thank me for putting her in Mandarin immersion, but she did declare a Chinese major, and she's going to do poli-sci. So I feel like, okay, that kind of worked there. I would add I think articulation, being upfront with parents about, because we kind of get the elementary, like that's our entry point, and everybody tells us this is, we get a lot of information as kindergarten parents, as first grade parents. Parents need to push for, and districts and administrators and teachers need to do a much better job of telling parents, as Love said, what happens in middle school. In high school, a lot of times, in far too many districts, San Francisco among them, there's nothing. Like my kids took Spanish in high school because there was not Chinese at their level. So the school district needs to think about articulation and then communicate that to parents. And parents need to push for it, because I feel that in some, not all, you guys are in great school districts. San Francisco drives me a little crazy sometimes. I feel there's a bit of a bait and switch. You get into kindergarten, it's great. 6th grade is good. And then at 7th, they're kind of like, yeah, it's been fine, but we don't need you anymore. So, and the only other thing I would add for my blog, I take guest columns. So if you as a teacher or administrator or a parent have something you feel should get out there, I take anonymous columns too. Give me an email and I will see what questions we have in the
And I just want to chime in with one thing that I don't think we talked about that much, but so even if the process is great, usually I think it sounds like for a lot of us, K through 5th grade is great, but that's really different from the retention. Like a Chinese reader, the books that they went through, the stories that they went through in like 4th, 5th grade I felt great for a couple months, but if you go back and quiz them on how to use those vocabulary words in different ways or in natural speech 3 months out, or even a couple months out, maybe they can give you the pinyin, they know how to say it, they know how to read it, but to use it and the retention, because there's learning in a bubble. I guess that's one thing to emphasize for parents too, is all the different ways in which you have to try to get the Mandarin into their lives outside of school.
And I will say that my daughter at Wisconsin, who's taking now a Chinese class, she's like, I wish I'd listened more in middle school, because if I'd actually listened and remembered all of those stories, I'd be doing so much better now. So let's see, a question from the audience. Do you support your children's English learning at home? If yes, how and how long do you do that? And they're asking this for incoming Chinese immersion parents this fall. Who'd like to take that?
I'm happy to jump in, but I'm sure other people have things to contribute. What helped us was since the beginning, I think the most important thing is just read every night to your child or children. Read every night. That's what the school told us. And now in middle school, they have more than caught up. It is scary though. Just be prepared, kind of like what the other parents mentioned. You'll notice like they are quote unquote behind in English just because they're learning Mandarin, one of the hardest languages in the world. But the English will catch up. So I think just as long as you're reading at home with them, and I think we, can all make a little time to do that. I think that was the most important piece of advice for me.
And I would add to that, while I absolutely completely agree with that, I will say that with my two older children, that they were not in a Mandarin program. I don't think my reading time was much different with my Mandarin speaker than it was with my other children, because I just believe reading is important anyway. But what I would agree with on the language piece in particular, for our child, the spelling, that was something that really surprised me. But the English spelling was something that they had trouble with for a while, and words would look, kind of how you would say them, but be missing certain letters. And again, by about third grade or so, that catches up. And for us, by middle school and high school, it exceeds grade level dramatically. So it's very hard to not worry about it. At the same point, the advice not to worry about it, but just to spend the time with them is absolutely correct.
So I think it's less of a concern for us, but I've definitely seen families who predominantly speak Chinese at home in our programs worry more about that. For the few kids that came, it was very exciting for us. The kids that didn't really speak English, it was like, go, please play, hang out with those kids. We saw firsthand that catch up, but that was definitely, it took a little bit more work for those families. But Netflix now, Netflix is great for the bilingual programming.
And that's one thing I will say. I'm seeing more and more parents sharing, like, oh, there's this new great program on Netflix. Have your kids watched it yet? And I think that kind of parent sharing, because sometimes teachers may not be, they're not maybe watching those shows or really thinking about because the teachers by definition are Mandarin speakers, like what would an English speaking family kind of what would speak to them and to their kids. And to educators, definitely, I would say that use your parents. I mean, clearly we are all moms who got way involved. We're all on PTAs. We're all on committees. Use the parents to broadcast out and amplify some of the information that you feel that the families may not be getting, because I always felt like the more information you give families, the less, for the teachers, the less we will hassle the teachers, drown us in information, and then we'll leave you alone to let you teach our kids.
Especially, I think the contemporary stuff. I think part of the problem with pleasure reading is when I look to the materials, it's, you keep seeing Monkey King and Mulan and things about emperors and warriors. And it's like, where's the, Harry Potter might be a stretch, but at least, something funnier and more contemporary. Although I have to say, at the very beginning of this conference, I found very interesting in the waiting room before it all started that there was some Chinese rap happening. And that was very exciting.
Let's see if we've got any other questions. I'm not seeing any. Anybody got another question to throw at the panel? We probably have time for two more.
Elizabeth, there was a question in, I think in the private chat about whether schools offer parent workshops for the language immersion programs. And that's something, I don't know that I would call them workshops, but our district probably did meetings at least annually with parents to kind of talk, even kind of kindergarten through fifth grade, but then going into middle school and going into high school. And during COVID, while they weren't able to have an in-person meeting, they did a recorded session where the high school teacher talked, and they really showed, was super helpful, but they showed the path of high school and what different options could be, because it wasn't, not for us in high school, not every student chooses the same path. And whether kids continue in middle school afterwards or not affects their path as well. So they would show, almost like 4 different options that kids might take. So that was extremely helpful. I would say they were meetings, and they were about annually. Early in the program, they were a little more frequent than that. But I think many parents would have liked those to have been even more frequent in the beginning. Like quarterly would have been fantastic for parents, but a lot for the district to be able to handle.
And I will say A Parent's Guide to Mandarin Immersion, the book that I ended up writing, came out of the panels that the parents did in San Francisco, because the district was not doing anything. And we were so desperate for information that we put them on. And that's the write-ups of those ended up becoming that book. So sometimes parents step in. And I've got to feel that administrators can share this information across school districts, so they're not reinventing the wheel. I know that Asia Society has done some materials, but like somebody just needs a slide deck that you could send out to every principal in the country so they can all use it. It explains pinyin and tones, and so because they don't have the time to do a slide deck. There's got to be an internet Asia Society who can do that. I'm saying maybe not. I don't know.
I have a question for the other panelists. I'm curious if your schools or your teachers are reaching out more and to people in Asia, in Taiwan or in China, and doing more things that takes advantage of the technology now on Zoom. Are you zooming into classrooms or building relationships?
So we previously did that at our elementary school. We tried to get some pen pal programs going, but it takes a lot of initiative to do that. And what we did have was sister schools in China. And I know this is something that not everybody can participate in, but when we went to China after our 5th grade graduation, we had a pen pal program with one school, and we went and met them there, and we connected with the children and the teachers there and the parents there, and it was one of the coolest things that we did on the entire trip, was to spend the day at this school. And again, that's not something that every family is in Mandarin Immersion is going to be able to do, but it's so worthwhile to have that connection.
And there was a question about, the one thing, timing is so hard to work out to do like real-time stuff, which is why pen pals often work out better. There's a question about middle school immersion in your districts. And most districts, and it was interesting, Jennifer, what you were saying, because most districts I seem to have set upon, they offer Chinese language arts, and there's 2 classes, Chinese language arts and usually social studies. I think partially because that's not something that there are like federal tests on, and so they're not worried about those grades going down, even if they dipped a little bit. I haven't seen any, I don't think there are any middle schools that do beyond 2 of 5 or 6 classes a day in Mandarin. And then in high school, it's just, if you have high school Chinese, it's 1 class. Is that what you guys are seeing?
Yes. That's what we see too. Mm-hmm.
Ours is a bit different as an independent school. There's a lot more time, I think, and they have the room to get pretty creative with that. There's a lot more kind of public speaking built in. We had one project session where they had to come up with their own food truck plan. And so they studied food, they went over to each other's houses and planned recipes and cooked, and then they actually had to pitch. It was Shark Tank style. So they went in front of actual investors. I think one of it was even involved in like Alibaba, and they had to get up and pitch their food truck plan and learn about budgeting and things like that, and ask for money for their plan. And like, one of the proudest moments was afterwards, my daughter said, "I'll never forget how to say net profit in Chinese."
So I want to say something important about middle school, though. That's when kids start to think a little bit more for themselves. And if they're not bought into staying within the program and making the extra commitment to be in it, and it's really challenging when they're learning American history in 8th grade in Mandarin, because that's what our kids are doing right now. The 6th and 7th, 8th grade curriculum, which is a lot more world history, is very relevant in Mandarin, but the 8th grade curriculum is far less relevant. And it's more complicated in Mandarin. But in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, that's when the students start to say, I'm done with this. And you can't really make them do it. So you have to, I don't know what the answer is all the time, but we see a big drop off just a couple weeks into 6th grade because kids aren't willing to do it anymore. And the parents can't force them to be in the program anymore. And yeah.
And we're at the end of our time, and I know we'll be losing people to breakout sessions. I want to thank all of our parents for being on this panel. And again, a huge, well, thanks to Cleopatra for helping set this up. Thanks to the Asia Society for organizing it. And thank you again to all you teachers who make our children bilingual.
Awesome. Thanks
Thanks,
all.
everybody.
Thanks.